It's amazing to be in person. I've not been on a real stage in 2 years, so this is so cool, and to see your faces, at least half of them. So I'm going to be talking about teaching, which is a topic very near and dear to my heart. You may have heard the saying, those who can do, those who can't do, teach. And it's my least favorite saying ever, so the title of this is a play on that. So I first want you to remember when you were learning to code. So for me, I thought that I was stepping into a computer science classroom. I was going to learn how to format Microsoft Word documents better. That's what I thought computer science was. I instead was given a piece of paper with Python code on it and was asked to type that into the computer. And I thought it was magical that I could type something in and tell the computer to do it. I instantly fell in love. And maybe you have a similar story. Maybe you started hacking on MySpace or Neopets, or maybe you got a programming book and thought this was really, really cool. Or maybe you wanted a career change, and so you got into tech for that reason. But that's awesome too. And so there's some awesome thing about code that drew you in and kept you hooked. I think of it like adult Legos. I get paid to build things, and I think that's pretty awesome too. So I have some questions for you, and those of you at home need to do this as well. So raise your hand if you've ever had to deal with a really tough bug. It's probably almost everybody. Who's dealt with imposter syndrome? Who's wanted to quit programming at some point? Yeah, me too. So pretty much everybody agrees on this. So it's your job to make it so that that's a little bit easier for the next person. And so we have more rainbows and unicorns and less imposter syndrome and less frustration. Let's make this industry a better place for everybody. Hi, I'm Allie. I teach people to code. I'm still a licensed teacher in the state of New York. I went through education classes in school, and then I was a faculty lead for a coding boot camp, and now I lead a developer advocacy team. And in all these positions, I have taught. Even when I was a software engineer, I was teaching a lot on the job. You're a teacher too, so let's do another pop quiz. Who here has ever mentored another developer at work? Who here has ever answered a question on Stack Overflow or from a colleague? Who's written documentation or a blog post? Who here's managed somebody? Yeah, a lot of people. Pat yourself on the back, you're a teacher. So I have some advice for getting better at your newly found side gig of teaching. So think back again to when you were learning to code. At first, it was probably the coolest thing ever. You were, again, building games or something really, really fun. You were able to make a hello world, and everything just felt shiny and new. But after that, it got a little bit more difficult. You started running into those error messages, and you started to doubt yourself a little bit more. Well, learning is really, really hard. I dropped out of computer science in my junior year of college, and now I've been a software engineer in some format for about 8 years, including leadership roles. So the fact that I thought that it wasn't for me and I wasn't smart enough or talented enough was wrong. And so learning is really, really hard. Be empathetic to your learners. Some things may take them longer to click with, and that's okay. Instill that in whoever you're teaching. I stand by the fact that oftentimes intermediate folks are the best teachers because they just went through the struggles themselves. They see the hard parts, and they're able to relate those to the people that are learning. I have a challenge for you. If you haven't been new at something for a while, I challenge you to go do something that you're new at. So whether that is rock climbing or aerial yoga, which is something I got really into before the pandemic, or taking an art class or a music class, do something that you're new at and put yourself in those shoes again and feel what it's like to be new, because it's really exciting, but it's also terrifying. You don't want to make a fool of yourself, but it's okay if you are, because you're new. So something that I really try to instill with learners is a growth mindset. It's been scientifically proven that having the thought process that your ability to grow and to extend your talents and knowledge is one of the key predictors of success. And so if you're working with new people, celebrate their wins. that hello world is a huge deal for them. Celebrate it with them. But also celebrate when your employee has implemented an awesome new feature, even if it's kind of small. Celebrate these wins. It's going to keep people motivated to keep learning. So I always would show this chart on my first day of teaching a new coding boot camp. And you're probably pretty familiar with this as well. So you started learning something and you're like, this is the coolest thing ever. I'm so excited. I'm going to be able to build all the things with it. And then you start to learn a little bit more and you're like, oh no, this is actually going to be much, much harder. Instead of taking 30 minutes to solve this bug, it's going to take me 2 days. Whoops. And then you get to this really low point and you're like, oh, actually, I don't know if this is possible yet. I'm searching all the Stack Overflow questions from 2004 and not getting my answer. Maybe it's just impossible. But then you fix it and you're like, oh, that's actually not too bad. I'm excited again and I can build new things. And then you get to the point where you're fully fulfilled with your new knowledge. You can use your new skill. And when you're learning a new thing, it's emotional. You go through this cycle. Maybe you go through this cycle 40 times in one day. But what your job is to make it so that that valley of despair is a little bit less of a valley for the next person. Make it a little bit less steep. And whether that's answering a question, adding documentation, or writing a blog post, that's going to make somebody else's life a little bit easier. So do that. I know we've all been in that valley of despair before. Also, you're trying to teach somebody to teach themselves. If I was still a jQuery engineer, I think I'd be at a very different point in my career. Things grow and change with tech so rapidly that the most important thing that somebody can do is be able to teach themselves that new thing that's coming out. Because we've all done that, and we've all had to do that. So instill this when you're teaching somebody. Show them how to distill what's a good resource and what's a bad resource. Show them how to Google things more correctly. Show them like Google filters or something along those lines. Show them where they can find the resources to build something themselves. If you're just teaching somebody to build exactly what you're teaching them to build, it's not really teaching them. What you want to be doing is teaching them to build the thing that they want to build, not what you're teaching them exactly. Also, know your audience. So I lead a developer advocacy team. So our job is to teach customers about our product. What I have my managees do, or my team do, is build out personas. So who's the ideal person who's going to interact with our product? Who are these different personas? Who are these different people? What are the problems that they face? Where are they at in their career? Where do they hang out online? How many of them are there? Then if you're writing to that person or you're creating content for that person, you know who that person is and you can imagine them and think through them. If you're writing a beginner blog post and you're using all sorts of fancy jargon, you're probably not going to appeal to that beginner audience. And the inverse is true too. If you're writing an advanced piece of content and you're adding in what a variable is, you're going to be turning off that advanced learner. So have that one person in mind that you're writing to. I promise it'll appeal to a lot more people outside of that. Also, if you're teaching something like a workshop, get information about them ahead of time. Hey, what's your comfort level with React? Everybody raise your hand on 0 to 5. That's a way to pull your audience really quickly to understand their comfort level with things. Here's what a lesson actually looks like. So the first one is learning objectives. Especially adult learners love to know where they're going with the lesson. They love to know what they're going to learn ahead of time so that they have a roadmap in mind. So that's the first part. The second part is framing. Why should they care about this thing? Why is it important? Why is it relevant to them? Why are they going to use it on the job someday? The next part is practicing. So is talking about the thing. Why is it important? Here's a diagram showing the workflow of this. Then we talk about the thing together and we write code together. So I might be typing on my keyboard, but it's up on a projector like this so everybody can follow along. Then group work, you all do. Different students can teach each other. Application is the most important part of anything though. Having exercises that people work on is the most critical part of all of this. And then you do is independent work once that group work is done. Sometimes this could just be homework or something along those lines. Then you always want to review and have checks for understanding. So one of the PMs on my team always gives me documents to read, and at the end, he asks me very pointed questions about my reading to make sure that I got from that document what he wanted me to. And if I answer wrong, that's a good sign to him that he has to go change that document to make the point better. And checks for understanding are exactly the same thing when you're teaching somebody. You ask them pointed questions to make sure that they're understanding it so that you can adapt your teaching. These aren't like pop quizzes where you're grading people on that. You're making sure you're doing a good job teaching. So that's a really important part of the process too. And if you're not reviewing information, it's just going to not sink in for people. They need to actively retrieve that information and come back to it. So I remember when I was learning to code that the red error messages that I would sometimes get in my console were terrifying. I thought it meant that I was a failure and broke my code and everything was wrong. But as you grow as a developer, you learn that those error messages are your best friend. Create a safe place for your students or your managees to fail, because if you don't have that place, it's going to stunt their curiosity and creativity, and you want that in your team. So make sure that people can learn from their failures and have a safe place to do that, and that they have the ability to communicate with you those failures as well, because finding out from somebody else is much worse than learning out from them. Linking is one of the most important concepts in teaching. It's linking new information to information that they know already. So, hey everybody, you learned what a variable was back in algebra class. Can anybody explain to me what a variable is? Okay, awesome. Well, today we're gonna be learning about variables again, but this time it's in JavaScript. So you've seen that before. Another thing that I would always do is I would teach object-oriented programming by asking everybody to go find a utensil in their house, so like a fork, spoon, knife. And then I'd have them write an object about it, or a hash map, or a dictionary, whatever language you're using. And then we'd say, hey, if we were gonna build a web app with all these utensils, it'd be pretty hard because you all have similar information, but they're not standardized. You all have different keys and values. And so let's use OOP in order to make this more standard. And then we'd use the utensils throughout teaching the whole class on object-oriented programming. Okay, so you may have heard about learning styles, like different people are auditory or visual learners or kinesthetic. And that's true, but science mostly says that most people don't actually have that learning style. They may like learning in a certain style, but the way that people learn is actually if they learn the same thing multiple ways in different formats. So if you read a blog post and also watch a video on the same topic, and then also build an app with that. So all of these different formats together make the best learning system. I use this as a developer advocate too. I reuse my content. So if I write a blog post, I'm always gonna have a video to go along with it. I mean, I have a script written for me already, so I can use that, but I can also hit different learning styles, and somebody can use that blog post to go along with their video. This is something that I see all the time with programmers. I know you've been doing this forever, but your learner hasn't. And so if you're giving them 5 minutes to learn what took you 10 years to learn, it's going to overwhelm them. Give them what they need to know first. Start slow and steady and gradually, and then give them more and more information as you go. Don't overwhelm them. Don't just teach in order to show your knowledge and how smart you are. Instead, teach what they need to know. So I see so much jargon hate on social media, and I agree with it to an extent, but we need a shared language as an industry. A lot of these terms mean something and are going to allow us to converse more as programmers. So I say use jargon, but break it down. Tell the person the first couple times that you use that piece of jargon what that word means. It's going to make it so that they can use that term themselves and break it down if they need to in an interview or something along those lines. Also, emphasize the unimportance of memorization. Tech interviewers, I'm looking at you. This is one of the most common graphs within teaching education. It's Bloom's taxonomy. Memorizing something is the very base of the pyramid. It's the lowest level. Creating with it is really high up. So if they built out an open source project with something, that shows that they understand something way more than you pop quizzing them in an interview. Ask them to evaluate the difference between different frameworks. That's going to show their understanding of the pros and cons as well. They can always look up the syntax. That's not what's important. Them being able to create with it is really important. So teach the why and the how, not just the syntax. Teach more than that. What are the use cases that they're going to use this at work? How's that going to look? And make sure that they practice all the time as well. I see this so much with new programmers where they'll do a tutorial after tutorial after tutorial, but not actually build anything with that, and the knowledge just never sinks in. They don't know how to write these things. They can just view it in a blog post. So make sure that you're making people apply their knowledge, or if you're teaching yourself something, make sure that you're building something with it. Also, it's okay to not know something yourself if you're teaching somebody. In fact, that's super valuable for your learner because they probably think that they need to know everything about everything immediately. I know early in my career, I would stack up on courses online about every single random topic you could imagine, from game development to C++ to AngularJS, and there was no need for that. I didn't need to know all of that, but I felt like you needed to know everything. But if you show your learners that you don't, you can always say, hey, I don't know the answer to that question, but let's look it up together in a few minutes. That'll make them feel like you're willing to help them out, you're there for them. However, you still have gaps in your knowledge, and that's totally fine. They're going to always have that as well. So I wake up feeling so lucky in the morning that I get to teach people to code. It's a magical experience for both parties. I get to talk about this thing that I love and see it sink in for somebody else too. So cool. And I get to learn a lot myself from it too. I have been able to challenge myself to learn so much more than I would have if I didn't have to teach the thing. If you can't explain something to a beginner, chances are you don't actually know that thing that well. Plus, people think you're an expert at things, and you get to talk on stages like this. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to be doing a longer session on teaching later. I'm Spittel everywhere. Thanks so much.